Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Last May, a few of my friends and I decided to have a birthday celebration for one of our friends that was turning 19. Her birthday was on Friday the 13th, so she wanted to do a sort of Halloween theme with all of us in costumes and then go to a local bar. So, we got all dressed up, some of us in a little more sexier looking costume, and some of us in some dumb costumes. So there was a total of 5 of us. The birthday girl, Mandy, was a witch. Angel, dressed as an angel. I was a zombie. And Cassie and Leila were ketchup and mustard bottles. We all met at Mandy's house and started with a few shots. Cassie didn't really drink, so she was our designated driver that night. And after we had our liquid confidence, we headed out to the bar, no longer fearing what people would think of us being in fall costumes in the middle of May. When we got there, it was actually quite the opposite of what we expected. Some of the patrons took pictures and asked us what the occasion was, and even bought us some drinks, so we were genuinely having a good time there. However, at one point, there was a group of guys that came in, 3 of them. It was one of those moments where they opened the squeaking door, so we all looked and then continued dancing and laughing. As with everyone else that was there, they were staring at us off and on until they finally approached us. They made some cheesy comments about the angel costume and then asked us why we were dressed up, so we again explained that it was for a birthday. They wished her a happy birthday and then bought us all drinks as well. We thought that would be the end of it, but they seemed to linger around, just watching us. None of us were really giving them any attention. Cassie and Layla were dating, and I had a boyfriend, and Mandy and Angel were just doing their own thing and having fun. So, there definitely weren't any signals telling them that they were welcome to stay and hang out with us. However, it was a bar, and no one reserved anything, so they had every right to be over by us too. We were in a smaller section in the back by the dartboard and pool table. And after a while, we all noticed that they would lean in and say something and then look over at us and nod or point. I think we all anticipated what they may have wanted, and we really weren't interested in picking up a date, so we decided to leave and then find another bar. But as we were walking out, one of the guys hollered out asking where we were going, and I said home. We found another bar that wasn't too far from the first one, and we went in to continue our fun. However, those same 3 guys came strolling in not long after us. We all looked at each other, making sure that we weren't crazy, and tried to pretend like we didn't see them. This time, we sat at one of the back tables and decided to order something to eat so we weren't just running on alcohol. But it was only a matter of time that these guys would finally come over, and of course, one of them sat in a chair next to me, and one sat on the other side next to Angel, and one continued standing. They asked us how old we were, and we were hoping if we were honest that they would just leave us alone, knowing that we were still pretty young. But instead, they seemed pretty happy with this idea. They made comments on how good we all looked and offered to buy us more drinks while slipping in the comment about how we must still want some since we lied about going home. I then said something about wanting to get something to eat before going home, which is why we ended up at that bar. But ultimately, we all declined the drinks, now no longer feeling comfortable around them. We ordered a plate of nachos to share, but when it arrived, no one immediately touched them due to the awkwardness of the air. So the guy closest to me pulled them closer and started eating them. And as they were devouring our nachos, they started laughing and talking about themselves, and we didn't know what to do about it. We just sat there looking at each other while occasionally giggling when they said something and laughed. At one point, I had taken out my cell phone and I was texting my boyfriend to let him know what was happening with my left hand, which wasn't exactly easy for me to begin with. However, the guy must have noticed and was obviously mad about it. I could tell by the way he slammed his hand down on the table, and then he said, "Hey, no phones out on the table." And after looking at me angrily, he then started laughing, and so did the other two. To say that I was freaking out would be an understatement. I don't know what their plans were, but I was too afraid to get up and leave, but even more terrified of what might happen if I stayed there. Thankfully, Cassie stood up and started walking away when the guy again said in his booming voice, "Hey, where are you going?" And without flinching, without a stutter or a hint of fear, she said, "To the bathroom." And she kept walking. I only hoped that she had a plan and waited for her to return. It probably felt a lot longer than it actually was, but she finally came back and without acknowledging them, told us that we should go. We all nodded in agreement, but we were all waiting to see who the first person to stand up would be. And that's when Angel shot up real quick and walked towards Cassie. The guys then tried inviting us back to their place for more free drinks, as if they hadn't already terrified the hell out of us. We all declined and finally got the courage to stand up and started walking towards the front of the bar. And of course, they were following right behind us as if they were part of our party. That's when we noticed Cassie's whole plan coming together. At the front of the bar was her dad, in full police uniform, greeting us with open arms. He apologized for being late and then immediately followed up with, "Those guys with you?" We all looked back and noticed that they were just standing around, trying not to make eye contact with us. He then followed us outside, and we were all thanking Cassie for her quick thinking and for him showing up to save us. Her dad has always been such a gentle giant, but not that you could tell just by looking at him. So I felt relieved that those guys seemed to be pretty intimidated by him, or at least the uniform. He followed us back to Mandy's place and made sure no one else followed either. And thankfully, we never saw or heard from them again. We finished our night inside watching dumb horror movies on Netflix and eating all of our snack foods, so we didn't let it ruin our night. We're a lot more careful now when we go out to places like that, and I now have an emergency text set up so I can send it quickly. I, a 20-year-old female, was in a new city, trying to navigate back to my hotel. It was beginning to get dark outside, so I started getting anxious, and I picked up my pace, even though I was on a main road and there was still lots of people around me. In my rush, though, I turned down the wrong road. After a very short amount of time, I noticed that the road looked pretty empty, and it was definitely darker further down. It gave me the creeps, which made me realize that I turned down the wrong road, so I turned around to go back to the main road. That's when I noticed that some guy was walking close behind me. I'm not exactly sure how to explain how close he was. Not so close that he was in my personal place, but he was close enough for me to freak out. He looked creepy too. He was wearing a black sweater with a hood pulled up, and his hands were kept in his hoodie's front pocket, and it looked like he might have been holding something too. I only got a glimpse of the front of him because right after I turned around, he quickly turned around too and then speed walked away from me, back onto the main road, and then vanished around a corner. I don't know if he was stalking me, but it was weird as hell. Why did he turn around right after I turned around? And why did he walk away like that? Did he suddenly realize that he also went down the wrong road? Hi everyone, I work for Gloria Jeans. It's a coffee place here in Australia that sounds a lot like Starbucks. That being said, I've never actually been to a Starbucks. Anyway, the chain is fairly popular around Australia. I've worked here for about 2 years now, and I started when I went to university studying women's studies. I'm still working at Gloria Jeans because the cost of living in Australia is so damn expensive, so I need it as a side job. Basically, I need this job to help me stay afloat. I was serving in the morning rush of people who were waiting with various degrees of patience for their morning coffee, when I noticed a woman that I hadn't seen before. I asked her for her order, and to be honest, I don't remember what it was or her name. It's hard to remember it all, you know. The morning rush was over, and she was still there. There was nothing weird about her, and she didn't give us any trouble like our Karen or Darren characters would. I asked her if she was okay, and she asked me how I was doing. I said I was fine, just the morning rush can be a little bit intense. She asked if she could ask me a few questions, and since it was quiet, and management likes it when we have good rapport with our customers, I agreed with her. She asked if I had a partner, and I said no, not at that moment. I swear, her face lit up. So far, nothing was super weird except that. I apologized to her, and I told her that I wasn't looking for anybody, but she didn't look fazed at all. Each day afterward, she showed up and wanted to speak with me. It was really getting annoying. She would wait there all day and follow me when I had my time off work. I told her that I was on a break and I needed space to eat and rest. She sat at the table across from me, staring and eating her food. She hadn't done anything violent, just being really weird, you know? I asked her to be left alone, and she sulked and got up and left. But she was back again the next day. I talked to my manager about it, and he didn't take it seriously. One day, I had to take my car into the repair shop to get it fixed, so I had to catch the bus instead. I hate taking public transport, but it was either that or an Uber, and I wanted to save up some cash. Anyway, she was on the same bus, and then she got off at my stop. I had to sneak through different apartment blocks to hide from her, so she wouldn't know where I lived. I told my manager what happened, and finally, he asked her to leave the store. I tried ignoring her. One day, I had to work late and I was walking out to where I parked my car. 2 things were wrong. She was sitting on my car, and she was waiting for me. I said, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" And she said that she had been waiting for me and that she had missed me. I told her to leave me alone and I drove home. Well, this was where I made a big mistake. I didn't realize that she put an AirTag on my car and then found out my address. Over the next couple of months, I was sure someone was looking through my windows. One of my plants was also stolen. I'm not sure if it was her or not. And I noticed strange little bottles on my front step. It was incredibly strange. I didn't see her at my house until I realized that I forgot to take the bins out, so I did that. I came back inside, I closed and I locked the door. And then, I came back to see her sitting in my living room. I let out a scream when I saw her and the maniacal grin on her face. She told me that she had been waiting so long for this, So I ran to my phone and I called the cops while she tried to take the phone from me, screaming at the top of her lungs that she loved me and that I was hers. I was backed up into the kitchen when she grabbed one of the knives, threatening me with it, and I punched her to get her away from me. That crazy bitch started slicing into her own arms. It was the most insane thing that I have ever seen in my life. My neighbors heard the screaming, and the police and the ambulance came to take her away. She had lost a lot of blood, and surprisingly, the cops got her to drop the knife. I don't know what I would have done if they were forced to kill her in my home. She was arrested, and I think she was sent to a mental health facility. I do hope she's okay, but I'm just happy to be done with it. So I have a story about a guy that I met on the internet that ended up being, well, I think creep is probably an understatement, but it's the best word that I can think of to define him. I'm sure that some people out there have more appropriate choice adjectives for him, but creep works for me. Anyways, this was a good number of years ago. I was pretty active on social media platforms that doesn't exist anymore. I had garnered a decent following by posting stupid pop culture memes and references. Pretty shallow, I know, but it was fun, and I was like 16 at that time, and I liked the friendships that I was making, mostly because I didn't have many friends in real life. Most of the people that hung around my page were pretty decent, honestly, and I rarely had to block anyone or report anyone. One day, I got a message from someone that had followed me, saying that they enjoyed my page and that they thought that I was a pretty cool person. Obviously, they hadn't met me, and I didn't put much in ways of personal information out on the page. But again, I was young, and that kind of validation was something that I wanted. They seemed pretty normal at first, just telling me that they liked my content and about how much they liked the show or that band. It was a pretty normal conversation for the most part, and then they followed up with a pretty common ASL, which for those that don't know means age, sex, and location, asking for information about me. I told them that I was 16 and female, but then said that I didn't really want to give out my location. The other person said they were 19, male, and that they lived in the same state that I actually lived in. Obviously, he didn't know that, but I was a bit irked to see that he did live in the same state. He didn't push me at all to tell him where I lived, so although I was a bit, I said irked earlier, but I don't know if that's the word, I still tried to talk to him because he didn't know that I lived in the same state as him. We talked every once in a while, just chatting about whatever, mostly him telling me about the movies and things that he liked. But then, out of seemingly nowhere, he started hounding me and asking me for more information on who I was and telling me that he loved me. I told him that he was being a creep, and if he didn't stop, I was going to have to block him. Then, he threw out, Go ahead and block me, Caitlin, if it will make you feel better about yourself." I was sufficiently freaked out because I'd never told him my name, and there was no indication that my name was Caitlin on my page. So, I immediately blocked him. The fact that he knew my name told me that he had somehow gotten information on me, and I wasn't going to risk him being a creep even more than he had already. But, of course, if that was the end of it, this would be a rather boring story. And this was certainly not the end of it. I thought that he was going to go away after being blocked, but he was just getting started with me apparently. The next day, I got a direct message from an account that had literally no information associated with it. To the best of my knowledge, this site required information like a name and such, but the name was blank, the picture was plain white, and the description on the account was, "Not done with you yet." I knew right away who it was going to be, and I wasn't surprised when I saw that the message was, "I have something for you." I stupidly said, "What do you want?" And he responded with an incredibly inappropriate image. I won't describe it, but one can guess what it was. I blocked his account too, but it didn't matter. Every other day, he was messaging me with gory images, naked pictures of himself, and other various disgusting images. It hit a point where I ended up logging off my account entirely and just basically forgetting it existed. For about 2 weeks, this was sufficient enough to stop him from being able to harass me. Until I checked my email one day and saw a message from an email address that was just random characters. And sure enough, when I clicked that message, I knew it was him. The message was a picture of me from the prior year's school yearbook. It had my first and last name, my home address, my school address, and another very disgusting photo of a part of his body. This was where I knew I had to end this. I needed to get someone else involved. I ended up bringing it up to my mom. I was a bit slow with explaining it. But after a while, I basically just put it out there that this guy now knew where I lived, went to school, and had my full name in my picture. I showed her the email, and she told me that we needed to tell my dad, and that he said that we needed to take it to the police. Thankfully, the police did take it very seriously because this was a fairly credible threat, and he was sending adult content to a minor. We ended up making the report, and my parents basically told me that I wasn't allowed to use the computer anymore, and they informed my school of the situation too. That way, if someone was found around the school, or if anyone came up for me, they would know that it could be this guy. Even worse, that's exactly what happened and how this all ended. It was about 2 weeks later, and there was an announcement over the intercom that the school was going on lockdown and that all students needed to remain in the classrooms. We were all a bit curious and scared. This was the early 2000s, so it wasn't a common thing to have to go through these kinds of things. After several hours, they announced that the lockdown was over, and then my teacher got a call and then they asked me to come to the office. When I got there, my parents were there, and I had to sit with them, the administration, and also the police to discuss my situation. Apparently, this guy had come into my school and told the front office that he was my uncle, Ronald, which was my uncle's name, and he was an emergency contact for me, and that he was there to come get me out of class for the day because I had a doctor's appointment. Thankfully, the front desk knew my uncle and had his picture on file on the computer, and this guy was not him. Plus, they knew that there was a potential threat with this rando, and they asked him to wait in the lobby while they called me down. They then called the school resource officer and immediately cuffed this guy. A fun fact about this creep, he was in his mid-40s, not like 19 like he said, and he didn't actually live in the state. He was from Texas. I know I didn't mention where I live, but it was nowhere near Texas. Which meant that he already knew where I lived when he asked, and that's why he said that he lived in my state. I have no idea what this guy's intentions were, though I can kind of make some incredibly disturbing assumptions. But I'm glad that I ended up talking to my parents about it. I was banned from the computer for something like 2 years at my house, and I was fine with that. It was nice having the validation of strangers, but it clearly came at the cost of my own safety and security. and that was absolutely not worth it. In the end, he went down for a number of things, including for the content he had on his hard drive, and I don't think he's going to be getting out of prison, like, ever. I'm thankful for that, because I never want to meet him, ever, again. So me, an 18-year-old female, and my boyfriend Jordan went to Walmart for some quarantine shopping. You know, stuff to keep ourselves entertained, some basic health supplies, and most importantly, aromatherapy materials for me. Something important to this shopping trip is that I have extremely high anxiety and a bit of a paranoia disorder from abuse that I suffered as a child. This is important to note for two reasons. One, it's the reason that I went to the candle section in the first place, as I use aromatherapy to help with my anxiety. And two, with my paranoia, I often downplay dangerous situations in my head because I make myself think that I'm overreacting when I'm not. Now, on with the story. As Jordan and I were walking through Walmart, I thought I noticed a guy trailing us. I thought nothing of it and chopped it up to me being paranoid and decided not to tell Jordan, which I would later regret. Despite my internal decision that I was just being paranoid, I decided to test my theory and told Jordan that I wanted to go look at the stickers. We went into the sticker aisle and the guy walked past us, looking at us as he did. After the guy was out of sight, I broke down crying, but I didn't want to alarm Jordan, so I told him that the virus was just really stressing me out. Jordan calmed me down and we went on our way to the candles. As I was looking for my different scents that I would need to help myself get through the quarantine, Jordan decided to go look at some hardware nearby for some projects that he was going to work on during his quarantine too. We didn't quarantine together. I thought nothing of it, and I decided that I would just stay by the candles until he got back because I can be a bit of a wanderer and I didn't want to cause more stress than necessary. But not more than 10 seconds after Jordan walked away, I felt a pair of eyes on me. Something in my gut told me that it was the same guy from before, but I was too scared to turn around and check for myself. I stood there frozen in panic for about 30 seconds when I hear footsteps approaching from directly behind me. They come towards me, stop for a moment, and I then hear them walking away. And then they turn around and I hear them approaching me once more, and then stopping a few feet behind me. This entire time, I can't see who is behind me because I'm just paralyzed with fear. But after about 2 minutes, Jordan finally comes back up and gently wraps one arm around my waist, giving me a knowing look. We decided that we were done with shopping, even though we didn't have everything that we needed. We checked out and then went home. Later, Jordan told me that he had noticed the guy following us earlier, and he watched the guy standing about 5 to 6 feet behind me as I was looking at the candles, just staring at me. The guy then walked closer to me, noticed Jordan looking at him, and changed course to look like he was going to a different aisle. Then when he thought that Jordan had left, he walked even closer to me, standing about 4 feet behind me, again staring. That's when Jordan decided that this guy was up to something and then came back by me. I am so thankful that I had Jordan there with me because who knows what could have happened if he wasn't there. This is a story that pops back up in my mind from time to time. I've told it to a few people, but I definitely feel like it deserves its place in here. It's for sure one of the scariest moments that I have ever had as a child. Back when I was around 10 years old, my mom finally decided that it was time for her to start taking her driver's license. When she began taking lessons, she was struggling a lot. For that reason, my dad decided that he wanted to do some practice with her besides the official driving lessons with her instructor, just to make sure that she would pass the upcoming test first try. My little brother and I were attending swimming lessons at this nearby university at that time. Behind a forested area near the university lays this huge student parking area surrounded by trees, which turned out to be basically empty every weekend. My dad saw the opportunity to take my mom here to drive around for a bit and practice, and brought my little brother and I with them since we were too young to stay home alone. So we brought a football with us. When we arrived to the parking lot later on in the evening, my parents began their practice. My little brother and I quickly got bored though, so we asked if we could go over to this little grass field on the side of the parking lot to play some football. My parents let us, since they'd always be able to keep their eyes on us while driving around. And after playing for some time, my parents ended up driving around in the other end of the parking lot. They were approximately 300 to 400 meters away from my brother and I. But suddenly, this white Toyota pulls into the parking lot. We were playing almost right at the exit or entrance. The car turns around and then stops on my right side with a vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolls down his windows and presents himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, he was good looking, and he was also young. I guess maybe around 30. Well, this is where things started to get weird. On the passenger seat was a woman covering her face with a newspaper. All I could see was long blonde hair, and on the back seat was a baby sat in a baby chair. Thomas immediately states that he is from the police and that we have to get in the car immediately as he has to talk to us. My brother actually took 2 steps towards the vehicle, but I stuck my arm in front of his chest as I was sensing that something was really off about this. The woman was still covering her face at this point, not saying a word. Thomas then raised his voice and then told us once again to get in the car, or else he'd had to come out and get us. My brother and I froze out of fear. Suddenly, the woman put the newspaper down, showed her face and told us in the most calm motherly voice to just listen to the man, okay? The woman looked young and pretty, like a person who wouldn't hurt a fly. But at this moment, I began screaming as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at that point was that my dad was already running as fast as he could towards us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we didn't see it. My parents didn't have time to drive to us since the road down the parking lot was twisted all the way. When my dad heard my scream, he started yelling as loud as he could, saying, "Hey! Who the fuck are you? Get the fuck away from my children!" And as soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized that my brother and I weren't alone, he threw his car into gear and took off as fast as he could. He most definitely looked like a person who shat himself when he saw my dad. My dad was furious and told my brother and I to hurry back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He just wanted to beat up that guy himself. That resulted in us driving around for the next hour, trying to find him before my dad cooled down and decided that he should probably just call the police. We never found out who these people were. But this episode taught me to never judge a book by its cover. People can be the most friendly-looking people in the world and still wish evil upon you or the ones that you love. I'm not sure what these people would have done to us, But I am sure about one thing though. They definitely weren't from the police. A couple of years ago, my boyfriend planned a surprise birthday party for me, and I was sufficiently surprised by it. It was also where the story of mine took place. Well, to go back a little bit first, my boyfriend and I have been together since high school. After we graduated, we started attending different colleges, and he was a few hours away, so he was staying in the dorms. I was attending a local community college, so I found an apartment within my budget with the plans of my boyfriend moving in when he was done. College was fine for the most part. It seemed like the normal school stuff. I met some new friends, had some from high school attending there too. The schoolwork and the teachers were fine as well. But there was one guy that I could never really get away from though. That was Ricky. Ricky was in the same program as me, so I saw him a lot. One of the classes had a project that we had to work on in groups, and I was paired with Ricky and another girl named Micah. Micah was pretty cool though. She was typically more reserved, but she was kind and very smart. I was happy to be on her team, really. Then Ricky, he seemed like he was trying to show off since he was teamed up with two girls. He would talk about things he's done, like stunts or past jobs, that all seemed to end the same way. He would say that the atmosphere changed, or he didn't really like the new management, so he would quit. I could tell Micah couldn't care less and just wanted to talk more about the project, and I was a little more willing to cut him off, which is what I did. I would steer the conversation back towards our work. This is probably where my view of Ricky really started to shift. While working on the project, he started rambling about something, and Micah spoke up and said, "Can you please stop talking about yourself for one session?" I kind of chuckled and made a comment about making the quiet girl tell him off. I guess he realized he was outnumbered, so he just got up and left the room. We continued working and got the most done we had compared to the last sessions. Ricky then ended up catching me in the parking lot later after that class and stopped to talk to me. I wasn't rude or anything. I just treated him like I would anyone else. He asked me a few questions about the project, and then when the conversation seemed to die down, I started saying something about needing to go when he interjected and said, You want to go make out in my car?" With the most serious look on his face. Not knowing how else to react, I just started laughing, and his face didn't change. So I stopped laughing and asked if he was serious, but he didn't respond, so I just said no thanks and that I had a boyfriend. And then he laughed and said, "Oh, okay, cool," before waving and walking off to get in his car. I just stood there, confused for a quick second, and I then went and got in my car and immediately called my boyfriend to tell him what had happened. The whole time laughing about the awkwardness of that moment. My boyfriend laughed too and thought that it was weird, but then asked if he had ever done that before or tried flirting with me or someone else, and I told him not that I was aware of. He said the guy just seemed awkward, but to be careful because you never know, and I agreed with him. So the next class was pretty weird. I tried not making eye contact with him while we worked, but I could tell the whole time that he was just staring at me with a stupid grin on his face. It was obvious Micah noticed this too, probably made it more obvious when in the middle of working, he again said, "You sure you don't want to make out?" Micah looked just as embarrassed as myself, and I again told him no. The session ended pretty soon after that. However, this did not deter Ricky. Anytime that I saw him, he would ask that, whether it was in the parking lot, in the school, even if he was around other people. I told my boyfriend each time, who started to become more concerned and suggested that I tell someone at school, which I did. However, all they said was that they would have a talk with him, and that's it. So, he stopped being so verbal about his advances, but instead, he decided that he would wink, make some kissy faces at me, or make other suggestive hand motions at me. And now, I was really starting to get creeped out. Thankfully, the teacher was actually understanding and said Micah and I could continue working without him, since we were doing all of the work anyways. And the teacher even gave us permission to work in the teacher's area if we needed a place to get away from him. But it seemed like the less that I saw him, the more aggressive he would become. I saw him one time in the parking lot and tried to guilt trip me about the project. I told him that he needed to talk to the teacher about it, as it wasn't our choice, and he made another suggestive remark. I told him he was disgusting and being really creepy, and I quickly left as he stood in the parking lot with that same stupid grin. The last event I mentioned happened the week before my birthday, and between that and Ricky making me feel gross, I decided to cut classes the following week. I got most of my assignments from my teachers ahead of time, which was really nice. That way, I didn't have to be behind, and I told Micah so we could schedule time outside of class to meet up. My boyfriend was going to be doing the same and driving up to stay with me for the week, so I was pretty excited, and I didn't want anything to ruin our week. My boyfriend, Adrian, showed up within the next day or two, and we had a nice day together. Adrian said he wanted to take me somewhere specifically for my birthday, so he suggested that I get my oil changed. I had a better car, so we usually drove mine when he came up. He also encouraged me to go meet up with Micah that day in case I didn't feel up to it after my birthday celebrations. I was talking about the adult things that I wanted to get out of the way, so we had more time to spend together. So this was a load off, knowing that he was okay with me doing this all on the same day. So he sent me off with a hug and a kiss, and he stayed at my apartment and said that he might go visit with his parents. So the day went fine, and about the time that I was finishing up with Micah, I texted Adrian, and he even told me that I could invite Micah back and we could all go have dinner or something. I thought that it was convenient because she had asked me if I wanted to grab something to eat anyways, so we headed back to my apartment. Then, neither of us were expecting to have people scream surprise as I opened the door. This man had this whole party planned out, and I, none the wiser, thought that he was just being nice and having me do all this stuff. Anyways, the party was great. There were probably about 15 or 20 people there, including both of our parents and friends. And when we did the cake, Adrian was teasing me about something, and I ended up putting cake on his face. This started him trying to wipe it on me, while others around us were taking pictures and laughing too. It was legitimately a great time for me. But shortly after this though, while I was wiping my face off, Micah came over to me and softly asked if I invited Ricky or if my boyfriend was friends with him by chance. I was at first confused by this because she knew how creepy he was being, and even if I knew about this party, I sure as hell would not have invited him. She motioned towards the living room, and I rushed in there to see him helping himself to the food on my table. I had so many things circling in my head. The people here were all pretty close friends, including only 2 from the college that I had met. So the people that were here were invited either by text or a Facebook message. I had no idea how he found out about the party, and even more concerning, how he knew where I lived. I didn't want to cause a scene, and to be honest, I didn't know how he would react, so I just said his name. He looked up at me and said something along the lines of, "Oh, haha, there's the tease." I asked him what he was doing here, and then just bluntly said that he wasn't welcome here, and he started going off, saying some pretty nasty things about me. I was scared, I was angry, and I was embarrassed since our parents were there. Adrian had gone to the restroom to clean up, so he walked out while this was happening and tried asking what was going on, but I think he figured it out pretty quickly. He started approaching Ricky, telling him that he needed to leave now before we call the cops, and his face lit up. He really said, "Oh, is this the guy you've been cheating on me with?" Then, he tried making these crazy accusations of us. Not only were they completely false, but I could feel myself getting red as my parents and his parents were looking like they were getting uncomfortable. Adrian started getting a bit more aggressive towards him and pushing him towards the door, and my dad also started walking towards the door too. Ricky tried to give one last hurrah, saying he would fight Adrian for me, and then pulled out a knife. I was terrified at this point, and there were a few of us shouting, but thankfully, nothing else happened. My dad used to be a security guard, so he managed to do something to make him drop the knife, and Adrian helped knock him to the ground. They had him restrained pretty well, and I went to grab my cell phone to call the cops. The whole time, Ricky is still going on and on about things he has done to me and wants to do to me, to the point that Adrian ended up hitting him in the head pretty hard. It didn't knock him out though, and he just laughed. That felt like forever, but the police finally arrived and arrested him. And after they left, we tried to pull the party back together, which was pretty rough for me. I had locked myself in my bedroom for a bit because, I was pretty embarrassed, mostly by the things he was saying. They were all false, but the fact that he said all of that in front of people and in so much detail was horrible. He had to have thought all of that out, like fantasized it, which still grosses me out thinking about it. And I eventually came out after my mom and Adrian came and talked to me and also convinced me that everyone else was back to having fun. Overall, this made me file a restraining order. I told the school about it, and they seemed to reluctantly make changes so that I didn't have to see him anymore. I had a few online classes, and I'm sure that they changed things for him because we were never on campus on the same day, it seemed. However, he did try to press charges on Adrian, but nothing happened with that, thankfully. Like, he dropped the charges or something because he got papers saying that it was dropped or dismissed. I don't really remember. But that was probably one of the most memorable birthdays that I ever had, and I hope that I never see Ricky again. I'm using a throwaway account, so if my stalker is reading this, he doesn't get insights into my current life from the usual Reddit activity. I'm that paranoid. It's a very long story, but I feel like I'm doing myself a disservice if I don't write things out from the beginning. I've wanted to write about this for a long time now. It's such a nuisance of a situation, and it seems like any time that I find a semblance of mental peace, this piece of shit comes out of the woodwork to make sure that I still remember he's out there. This guy, let's call him Marvin, was in my circle of friends for a bit in high school and my early college years, late 2000s and onwards. He dated a good friend of mine, Alice, and we'd hung out both with her and with other friends too. We would sometimes smoke weed together and etc., but he and I weren't very close at all. He had some odd sense of humor, but I was kinda oblivious to the darker aspects of his personality till he cheated on my friend at a party. Well, according to his close friends, and then he lied about it. I was protective of my friends, and while I never interfered in their relationships, when my friend asked my input about it, I told her she deserved better than to be lied to. To be clear, even his friends said this to her, but she continued seeing him as a friend with benefits. We even hung out together in groups, but she mentioned to me many times that he's manipulative. Besides the cheating incident, she told me other instances of him acting callously. Once, when he was walking with Alice and her best friend, who he didn't like because he thought she was ugly, they dropped off Alice, and instead of walking her friend home, he just ditched her without saying anything. It was dark out. My friend also told me that the first time that they had sex, well, she didn't recognize it as assault at that time. Looking back, she realized he has raped her. He was very forceful and hurtful, and she didn't realize that was wrong because she was infatuated with him. He had a tendency to make silly homoerotic jokes, and this wasn't uncommon with guys that I knew at that time. He had gay friends and didn't have an issue with them publicly. But I remember once that this gay kid had a crush on him and was sending flirtatious comments on MySpace. Instead of just telling him that he's not interested or not actually gay, he flips out on him. He calls him a slur and viciously insults him in a tirade on his MySpace comment. Things started to get a little messier around 2010 to 2011. One day, Marvin gets into a car accident with his mom. His mom had some minor injuries. Alice had a great relationship with her, so she visited them. I don't know the full context, but something about the way the interaction went triggered Alice to tell Marvin that she thinks he's a sociopath. Probably the worst thing she could have done, but alas, out of my control. He's a good-looking guy and very fit guy, and definitely had some obvious narcissistic traits, but I'd never really learned much about sociopaths beside watching Dexter. So when she told me and the other friends about what she deduced, it was both eye-opening and a little freaky. We briefly worked together at a retail store, and I saw him getting close to the younger brother of a friend of mine from school who worked with us. He was a chubby kid with low self-esteem, and he admired Marvin's fitness and confidence. Marvin started working out with him, and this kid would always talk about how awesome Marvin is. But instead of just minding my business, I felt compelled to interject, and I messaged him one day just telling him to be careful about letting Marvin get too close, as he can be a bit manipulative. This is among the biggest regrets of my life. Of course, he tells his idol what I said, and while we remained cordial, clearly he knew what went down. He eventually leaves the job and goes into hiding after working a scheme to steal big-ticket items with the help from several team members, including my friend's brother. Another time, Marvin and I were smoking weed at the house of an old friend of mine. My friend, let's call her Diana, was a very trusting person and an incredible host. I was high out of my mind, and Marvin was kinda being highly complimentary of my friend who hosted us. Again, my stupid, nosy protective instincts kick in, and I grin and comment something like, I know what you're doing. He was probably just earnestly making connections, and I assumed that he must have manipulative intent based on what his girlfriend said. Alice told me that he's mentioned how I'm too judgmental and opinionated. He also didn't like that he felt that I and our other mutual friends were trying to interfere with their relationship. To be clear, I wasn't trying to hook up with this girl. I genuinely just didn't want to see my friend hurt. But she continued seeing him as a friend with benefits long after people told her to be wary, and at that point, I wasn't spending energy to try and nudge her. At some point though, she did break things off for good with him. The timeline is a little messy here, but in between the above incidents, I get a text from Marvin saying that he took acid and came to the realization that he's a sociopath. He then tells me some sad story about his family and says if he can't make himself become empathetic and feel things deeply, he would just kill himself. Being naive and not wanting anyone to die, I tell him that there's plenty of people who just want surface level connections, so he doesn't need to kill himself. He can just find other people like him. Looking back, I realize no one tells people they're a sociopath unless they're trying to scare them. And he probably told me this because he knew that Alice talked to me. He never thought much about her intellect, and he probably figured that I was the one who told her the theory that he's a sociopath. We fall out of touch after their full breakup, and with him hiding after the theft incident, and I deleted his number. At some point though, we connect on Facebook, and he basically tells me that he got addicted to coke while doing criminal business in Europe. He went to rehab and claims a psychiatrist diagnosed him as a psychopath. Of course, using the term more likely to be linked with violent behavior, and one that's not even a clinical diagnosis. My stomach sank. I didn't know how to react to this. I asked him how it made him feel to know for sure, and he said that it made him aware of his power. He then said that he respects me and would never hurt me, and I just blocked him not long after this. My last mutual contact with him was him texting me in 2012. His message was vague and provocative. He said, "I'm coming." I asked who this was, and he dodges the question to coax me to admit that I knew. I asked what he wants and that I don't appreciate feeling threatened. He told me that I'm so defensive and that he just wanted to say hi to me. And I told him that I think it's uncool that he's trying to mess with me because I have a weaker ego than him. He says something strange about how I should never talk down about myself or something like that. Well, I just blocked his number again. This was 2012, and since then, 2 or 3 times a year, I'll get an Instagram follow request from a new profile he's created. Sometimes, it's obviously him, and sometimes, it will be a weird spam-looking profile, but following mutual or former friends. My heart rate goes up every time that this happens. Sometimes I don't block right away because I don't want to make it obvious how much this puts me on the edge. I usually keep my social media on private, but once, I opened my Twitter so I could participate in some contest, and I kid you not, within 3 days, a faceless account only following a few accounts starts following me again. He's made a Spotify account and followed me, and Spotify doesn't let you block people, so instead, I just had to restrict what I share. I've often thought about starting a podcast, but this whole ordeal has made me hesitant to ever want to raise my profile to a point of being found by him. A friend of ours committed suicide a few years ago, and I'm ashamed to say that I almost didn't go to the funeral in case he showed up. I get terrified when I get calls from strange numbers. I got worried that I'd bump into him when I believed that we were both in my hometown at the same time. I don't know what his goal is, and that's what bothers me the most. Is this his punishment for me for getting involved in his affairs over a decade ago? On the one hand, he's never made overt threats to me. He knew where I lived growing up, and I was there for many years after our last conversation. I spent many nights concerned when strange cars parked outside, but thankfully I never had an issue. On the other hand, I don't know what he's capable of and if he's connected to dangerous people. He's moved back and forth between our hometown and other places several times and apparently changed his name along the way. My therapist suggests that perhaps he envies my large circle of deep relationships, as he clearly has issues with his own identity. But it's disturbing for me that I'm still on his mind after a decade of not communicating. I keep praying that he finds someone else to fill his boredom, then making sure that I don't forget he's out there. My friends have told me that it's silly to worry about this, but it's hard when I'm having a good day and suddenly see an Instagram notification that sucks the oxygen out of the room. I've spent 10 years anxious and in fear because of his cruelty, and I honestly wish that he kept his word about what he'd do if he couldn't find a way to be a normal human being. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.